You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old-time and bluegrass music. It's one of the most popular and widespread American fiddle tunes of all time, and probably everyone has heard it, even if the version included the lines, "Bringing Home My Baby Bumblebee." The tune was even made Arkansas's official state song, and has gone on to be a feature in many areas of American culture, from kids' cartoons to films, and it's even the name of a minor league baseball team. But where did this tune actually come from? The story behind its origin is a bit complicated, and not without its controversies and debates that continue on to this day. So stick around, because we're going to listen to some of the earliest recordings ever made of this tune, and these will probably be some of the oldest recordings I've ever played on this channel. Some of them even predate our supposed birth of country music by several decades. Because of this, the tune also finds itself in an even bigger debate. The debate over when the first country music record was actually recorded. So buckle up and let's see where this tune may have come from. You're listening to a legendary recording of Arkansas Traveler by the Texas fiddler Eck Robertson. It was made in 1922, before commercial country records were kind of a thing. This was over a year before Fiddlin John Carson made his first recordings, and over 5 years before Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter family would record for the famous Bristol Sessions, which many have dubbed the birth of country music. Robertson recorded Arkansas Traveler along with Sally Gooden with another fiddler named Henry Gilliland for the Victor label in New York City. With this disc, many historians have credited Robertson for making the first commercial country music recording ever. We'll explore the debate further later on, but the mystery that may be more interesting here is how and why this tune was even made during a time when no one really made fiddle tune records. And for a time, no one really knew why Victor was moved to agree to make them, or exactly how the recordings took place. At least, not until Eck's personal scrapbook was donated by his sole surviving daughter to the Country Music Foundation in 1992, which shed a little more light on this legendary recording. When some historians started digging through the collection of these old photographs, clippings, and correspondence, some more clues to this mystery were finally revealed. One thing found in this scrapbook was an old newspaper clipping Eck had kept from a newspaper called the Vernon Record. Since he was a child, Eck Robertson had been living in the town of Vernon, Texas. And by the early 1920s, he had been traveling and performing with two other locals under the informal name of the Vernon Fiddlers, all of whom were well known in the fiddling contest circuit. By April of 1922, just 2 months before the Victor recording, the fame of this trio had spread far enough that a newsreel crew from Fox came to the town to film the musicians. The headline of the Vernon paper read, "Representatives of Fox News Service comes to Vernon for express purpose of getting close-ups of Vernon musicians in action." The cameramen had traveled from Fort Worth with the express purpose of, quote, getting something different. Remember, this was 1922, so the newsreel film would have been without sound. But the cameraman focused on the men's instruments. One owned a Nicholas Amatus, valued at $20,000. And a Stradivarius at $25,000. The other man, Franklin, owned a Cordovara, and Robertson owned a Stainer from the 1700s. Unfortunately, to this day, the newsreel has never turned up and appears to be lost forever. But some historians have suggested that the whole experience may have sparked Robertson's interest in the mass media, And there is a possibility that Eck might have thought if he was good enough for a nationwide newsreel, he may also be good enough for a commercial music recording. Such a scenario might just explain why this southern fiddler might suddenly be motivated to try something no other fiddler from his area had ever tried before, and something none of the commercial record companies had really even thought of either. But while this theory might explain his motivation to record, why did Eck choose the Victor label in New York? This is where Henry Gilliland comes in. Gilliland has always been somewhat of an elusive figure in the historical record, and we don't know that much about him. We don't even know how the two men met or how long they'd been playing together before the recording. But a newspaper article, along with a photo of the two men, also turned up in this scrapbook. It shows the two men playing at a big Confederate reunion in Richmond, Virginia, in June of 1922, just 1 week before the recording in New York. Gilliland happened to have a contact over at the Victor Company, a lawyer by the name of Martin Littleton. On about June 28th, Littleton invited the fiddlers to stay with him in New York. So the two men went to the Big Apple and were given a tour of the city. Littleton introduced the two men to the people at the Victor studio, where Robertson was allowed to audition for a record. Robertson recounted this event 40 years later in an interview, recalling that when he met with the record producer, the man was real busy and abrupt and asked Eck to, quote, get your fiddle out and start off on a tune. Eck started to play, and he didn't even get halfway through Sally Gooden when the producer throwed up his hands and stopped him. He said, "Bye, Ned, that's fine. Come back in the morning at 9 o'clock and we'll make a test record." So on June 30th, the 34-year-old Eck Robertson and 77-year-old Gilliland returned to the studio to record 4 duets, including our legendary recording of Arkansas Traveler. Now, we don't really know for certain why Victor agreed to make these records in the first place. Up to that point, there wasn't any type of market for rural Southern music. Many historians have suggested that the Victor people were a bit hesitant and were perhaps just kind of testing the waters to see if maybe they could sell. But they must have thought they had some type of potential because they invited Eck back the following day. In all, the Victor session yielded 10 sides in total. Finally, on September 1st, 2 months after the sessions, Arkansas Traveler was released. We don't really know how well this initial release sold, and while Sally Gooden would be reissued a couple of times later on and make a huge splash, for some reason, Eck Robertson wouldn't make another record for another 7 years. While country music was starting to boom during the 1920s, partially as a result of his decision to record, Eck just kind of sat in the sidelines, while other country artists started to hop on the bandwagon. Here's where our tune finds itself in an even bigger controversy. While many consider Eck Robertson's recording to be the first country music disc, the tune itself had actually already been recorded before. Here's a recording of Arkansas Traveler, recorded in 1916, 6 years before Eck Robertson's release. It was performed by Don Richardson. So clearly, Eck Robertson is not the first person to make a country record, right? Well, this is a bit controversial too. Many have in fact dismissed Richardson's recording. I'm not going to make a case either way, but just share with you the argument made on either side of this debate, because it's kind of interesting. Don Richardson was a violinist, conductor, composer, orchestra leader, and music instructor. He was born in 1878 in Clinton, North Carolina. He attended the University of North Carolina and studied classical violin in New York City under 2 distinguished European instructors. While living in New York, Richardson taught violin and led a succession of orchestras. But although he had formal classical training, Richardson was a bit unique in his world because he always kept this deep appreciation and regard for old-time fiddling, which he had heard growing up in rural North Carolina. In 1900, he moved back to North Carolina, to Charlotte. In 1908, he decided to make a new musical venture, one that combined both his classical experience as a violinist as well as his fondness for old-time fiddling. He put together a program entitled Ye Old Time Fiddlers and undertook a tour of the South. His goal was to, in his own words, give the people of the southern states an opportunity of hearing the tunes their forefathers played in long ago. Richardson's stage show consisted of a sort of mashup between a fiddler's convention and a violin recital. Along his tour, he would invite the local fiddlers to compete for cash prizes in an old-time fiddling contest. But included throughout the event would also be a sort of classical music appreciation concert. He wanted to represent and demonstrate the two classes of violin, playing both old-time fiddling and classical violin as well. In 1911, in an effort to break into an even larger musical market, Richardson left Charlotte and moved back to New York City, where he put together a new orchestra. At this point, popular musical styles were beginning to change, and this group would perform a series of ragtime and polka numbers that he composed himself. In 1915, he started making recordings with the Columbia Graphophone Company. The following year, in May of 1916, he cut a number of traditional Irish and American fiddle tunes, including The Devil's Dream, Old Zip Coon, and on May 6th of that year, his version of Arkansas Traveler. Over time, Richardson kind of faded from memory, but around the time of the folk revival, since at least the 1960s, scholars and researchers became more aware of Richardson's early fiddle tune records. Some researchers making the claim that Richardson should be the man credited for making the first ever country music records. But this claim was not without its opponents. Many country music historians and authenticity-minded folklorists discounted Richardson's recorded work, arguing that his status as a professional trained violinist disqualifies him from being considered a genuine folk artist. And maybe they have a point, but can we really disqualify Richardson as a legitimate folk musician? This argument may not necessarily hold up that well either, because over time, after a bit of digging, new evidence began to surface that Richardson may actually have learned some, if not all, of the fiddle tunes he recorded, not from his musical studies or from published tune books, but rather from oral tradition. In fact, in an old newspaper article that was discovered, Richardson claimed to have begun playing music during his childhood in North Carolina on a homemade fiddle he had built out of a discarded cigar box, which sounds pretty old-timey to me. And even more telling is another old article from 1922 that related how an Idaho musician, having heard several of Richardson's records, wrote to the violinist, asking him where he could obtain the sheet music for his fiddle tunes. Richardson responded that these, quote, famous old violin numbers cannot be found and that the only way to obtain them is to have some old-time fiddler play them to a phonograph. The article's writer even goes on to state that Mr. Richardson himself learned them when he was just a, quote, barefoot boy in Sampson County. And all of this sounds pretty authentic to my ears. So maybe there is a strong case to be made that Don Richardson is our first country music recording artist. Well, here's the thing. Turns out Richardson wasn't really the first to make a commercial recording of Arkansas Traveler. Because there's an even older recording of Arkansas Traveler. Yep, older than 1916. It appears that the tune was actually recorded way back in 1902 by this man, Len Spencer. Now, many historians have also dismissed Spencer's recording as a commercial country music record. The argument will make a bit more sense when I play it for you in a bit. Spencer was born in 1867 in Washington, D.C. He was a singer, composer, and vaudeville star who was considered one of the most popular recording artists in the United States from the 1890s to the 1910s. Many of his roles were performed in either black or brown face, and he went on to record many sentimental ballads as well as a number of vaudeville sketches and comic songs. In 1902, he recorded his version of Arkansas Traveler, and I'll play a snippet.
Why, how do you do, boss? What might your name be?
Say, what made you think I was Ballcat?
Why, I just guessed it.
Well, just guess what my name is.
Well, how long
This
have you
recording
been
was a
here?
super big hit at the time, and according to some sources, may have sold over 1 million
Well, that was
copies.
here when I come.
While Spencer recorded Arkansas Traveler many some years before Eck Robertson and Don Richardson, he doesn't usually get the
Well,
credit for
how
being our
far is it
first
to the
country
next
music artist.
crossroad?
You just
For one
promise to
reason,
go
we
if you
have to
just
ask
come to
ourselves,
it.
is this even a music record? Or is it some type of comedy sketch? While we can clearly
Where does
hear
this
some
all go
legitimate
to?
old time fiddling on
Don't
this
go
recording,
anywhere. Stay
many
right
have
where she
dismissed
is.
it as being merely an old fashioned comedy routine. I'm not going to try to make a case either way on this debate, but it is interesting to note that the further back people attempt the exercise in locating where our first country music recording may lie, the more we have to question what this music even is, because around this time, the line between early country music and vaudeville begins to get a bit blurry, and it's kind of hard to draw a firm line anywhere. And there are many other earlier recordings that I haven't even mentioned that historians have suggested could vie for the prize of first ever recorded country music claim, but we're not going down that rabbit hole. Instead, we need to further follow the trail of our tune.
How far is it to the next
One thing this
crossroad?
recording does make
You
clear is
just
that the
follow
tune
your
was
nose
performed as
and you
type of an
come to it.
accompaniment to a comedy sketch, and not just in this recording only. Some of my listeners will be familiar with this skit, as performed by later artists like the Stanley Brothers or with Dog and Jerry. There is ample evidence to affirm that the tune was commonly played in vaudeville acts, circuses, sideshows, and minstrel stages throughout the 1800s. It was a popular number in its day, and from these early touring stage performances that it eventually was picked up by many fiddlers and rural musicians throughout the country, and eventually adopted into the folk tradition. It's also from the comedy sketch itself that we get our title. I'll provide a link to the full skit in the description, but the story is basically a dialogue between a traveler, sometimes portrayed as a city slicker, and a local man, usually some sort of country bumpkin. The scene opens with the Arkansas man sitting on a barrel in front of his cabin, playing a tune on his fiddle. When a traveler passes by and asks for directions and lodging, the Arkansas man doesn't do much to help, just kind of cracking jokes, not answering any of his questions, and barely looking up from his instrument. The traveler notices all this time that the man just keeps playing the same repetitive musical phrase over and over again, and he asks the man why he didn't play the second part. The bumpkin kind of scoffs at him, declaring that the traveler must not know anything about music because he's convinced that he's playing the whole tune. The traveler then takes up the fiddle and plays the missing second half of the tune perfectly. Overjoyed, the bumpkin's sour attitude melts away instantly, and he welcomes the traveler into his home, offering him food, whiskey, and hospitality. This is a pretty old sketch. The skit and the melody were actually published way back in 1858. You're looking at one of the original copies. The piece was attributed to an itinerant musician or stage comedian named Mose Case. Mose Case was an albino African American based in Buffalo and known as a virtuoso guitar player. He died in 1885 in New York City, supposedly penniless. However, while Case may be, or may not be, one of the first to publish Arkansas Traveler, there is much debate as to whether he actually originally composed either the skit or the music. And this is where things get hairy, so stick with me, because some historians claim that the piece was actually being performed some 2 decades before this publication. The person most commonly believed to have first composed it was this man, Colonel Sanford Faulkner. Faulkner was born in Kentucky in 1806. He was a planter, banker, and unsuccessful politician. The story goes that during a political campaign in the early 1840s, Faulkner was traveling in the Boston Mountains of Arkansas with several other politicians. He claims that at some point they got lost and stopped for directions at a humble log cabin in the woods. What actually happened at the cabin is now lost to history, but Faulkner, a natural performer, turned his experience into a skit that he would perform frequently with friends and acquaintances. The title of the skit was, of course, named The Arkansas Traveler, and many historians believe that Faulkner, and not Case, is in fact the arranger of this piece. But the story and the debate gets even more complicated because it is worth noting that approximately the same time Faulkner began performing The Arkansas Traveler, a similar song and related dialogue emerged as well, this time in another state altogether. We can't tell with any certainty which version came first, but in 1847, 9 years before Mose Case's published version, another Arkansas Traveler piece was published in Cincinnati, Ohio, by one William Cumming. According to one source from around 1900, we find that customers once flocked to the Golden Fleece Tavern in Salem, Ohio, to witness the performance of a version of Arkansas Traveler. Around the same time, Faulkner was known to perform his version. To this day, we don't really know for sure which one came first, the Faulkner version or the Ohio version. Now, it's interesting to note that when Cumming published his version in 1847, no composer was actually credited for the music. It is debatable, but this may indicate that the origin of the melody may just lie in the folk tradition. But some historians believe that the music actually originated with another Ohio man, named one Marie de los Angelos Jose Toso, sometimes known as Joe Tasso. He was born in Mexico of Italian parents. He was a concert violinist, teacher, and composer who also happened to live in Cincinnati. According to sources, Tasso is reported to have been heard playing the melody of Arkansas Traveler as early as 1842, 5 years before Case's version. And just to add even more confusion to the whole thing, the tune of Arkansas Traveler also turns up in an old manuscript by William Sidney Mount, the famous painter from Long Island. According to Mount, he collected the tune from a fiddler named T.J. Cook in 1852, several years before its publication date. Now, whether Cook, Tasso, Faulkner, or Case actually composed the melody themselves is still up for debate, and we'll probably never know for sure. Some have suggested that whoever composed it might have possibly just have borrowed the melody from a common folk tune at the time. If it was a folk tune, then maybe it has an even earlier source, possibly one brought over from overseas. It's a good question. So let's see if we can trace its source. Because this is such a popular and important tune, there's been a bit of research in searching for its source. Unfortunately, just like we can't really draw a definite line to any one single composer of Arkansas Traveler, the source of the melody has also baffled historians for some time. But there are some theories. The music historian Samuel Baird believed the whole melody may be what he termed, quote, an American amalgam, as he was unable to locate any single recognizable version of the tune in the British Isle traditions. According to Baird, both parts of the tune may have borrowed certain melody lines from a number of different unrelated tunes that were then floating around America during the 1800s. And there is a case to be made for this theory. As far back as 1922, one Francis O'Neill, in his publication entitled Waifs and Strays of Gaelic Melody, also looked into the source of our tune, and he suggests that Arkansas Traveler may have had a presumable Irish history. He lists 3 Irish tunes as in part the source of our American melody. The A part of Arkansas Traveler does have a bit of similarity to the old Irish reel entitled Johnny with the Queer Thing. The B part of Arkansas Traveler shares some similarity to a reel entitled The Priest and His Boots. And there is also some similarity with another reel entitled The Queen's Shilling. While Arkansas Traveler does share some similarity to these pieces, we don't really know with any certainty if our tune actually derives from any or all of these numbers. It could just be a coincidental similarity. And of course, there is a possibility that our tune may be derived from some other forgotten melody or group of melodies, and the true source of our tune may just be lost to history. When Arkansas Traveler was performed on various stages, it would eventually be picked up by local fiddlers throughout the country, and different versions of the fiddle tune would develop based on the local playing styles and dancing requirements of the area. We find early sources listing Arkansas Traveler as a tune played frequently for buck dances throughout the South, as it would commonly be played too fast for a simple square dance. In Maine, the piece was used for a contra dance called the Green Mountain Volunteers. It turns up in an old manuscript from the mid-1800s in Bellport, Long Island. We find it again listed in fiddle contests in Gallatin, Tennessee in 1899, where the tune was a whole category in itself. The fiddler who played the best rendition of Arkansas Traveler would win the prize. In Georgia, Arthur Tanner remembers his father, Gid Tanner, of the Skillet Lickers fame, and his uncle playing it from the stage in the 1920s. He said it would, quote, tear the audience up. It also turns up in old repertoires in Union and Snyder counties in Pennsylvania and in the Catskill Mountains. It turns up everywhere from Kentucky to Mississippi to Maine and the Ozarks to as far away as Arizona. Probably my favorite recording is by the West Virginia fiddler Eden Hammonds, who plays it with this great syncopated rhythm and also lends it a bit of this haunting sound in the B part. Before we follow this tune's path any further, I should probably discuss its role in one of Arkansas's most famous paintings. In 1856, an Arkansas artist by the name of Edward Payson Washburn completed this illustration of our tune. It pictures the meeting between the traveler and the squatter in our comedy sketch. 3 years after he made it, a Boston printing company made the first known lithographs of the painting available to the public. An initial printing of 1,500 were commissioned. Eventually, it would be printed by Currier and Ives and found its way to hang on the wall of countless homes throughout Arkansas. But unfortunately, Washburn didn't live long enough to enjoy the painting's fame. He died in 1860, just months later after its printing, after a sudden illness. Surprisingly, when he passed, someone noticed on his easel another work in progress. It was another illustration of Arkansas Traveler. This one portrayed the moment when the city slicker finally starts playing the second part of our number. It was entitled The Turn of the Tune. I've kind of been putting it off, but I should mention the tune's surge in popularity when lyrics were added with that chant, "I'm bringing home a baby bumblebee." These lyrics were written by the animation composer Carl Stalling. In the Looney Tunes short Bugs Bunny Gets the Boyd from 1942, the slow-witted character Beaky Buzzard sings his own lethargic lyrics to the tune.
I'm bringing home a baby bumblebee.
And that's how an American fiddle tune turned into the ubiquitous, and some would say quite annoying, children's song we all know of today. Before I leave you folks, I'll share one more version of Arkansas Traveler with lyrics that I find a little less annoying. It was composed by the Arkansas-born musician, Sean Camp. It's entitled Sis Draper. Camp has penned numerous songs for a number of well-known country and bluegrass artists. He came up with these lyrics after a conversation he had with his friend Guy Clark about his childhood. He told him about a lady he knew in Arkansas named Sis Draper. His grandfather and uncle used to always talk about her, long before he even laid eyes on her, and they built her up as this legendary fiddler. Eventually, one day at a local jam session, he actually saw her. She walked into the house, sporting a big beehive hairdo and a fiddle in a coffin case. She pulled it out and just shredded out these old-time tunes. So here's a version of Sis Draper or Arkansas Traveler with lyrics, and it's just so much fun. Well, folks, hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for listening.